and welcome to the Introduction to Programming Functions lesson. You've already seen some functions, but I've described them somewhat from a 30,000 foot flyby view. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper into functions. You use functions all the time in JavaScript, and so I want to dive into them. You're going to write a ton of them throughout your programming career and just show you how they work, the syntax of them, and the real power of them. It allows us, now what we're starting to do with getting into functions is allows us to modularize our programs and reduce the amount of code we use by not repeating functions and things like that. Now, in JavaScript, we use the term functions. Sometimes you'll hear the term methods, but traditionally you'll hear the term function more often. But when in other programming languages that do this, you might hear the term method more often than function. So I use those terms interchangeably to mean the same thing. There's little nuance differences, but just so that you know if I switch terms on you as we go through. Now, let's take a look at what a function does. A function, just simply like you see on the screen there, allows us to reduce the amount of code we're using, basically make it easier to maintain because we reduce the amount of code, makes our code more efficient, more elegant. It allows us to solve problems and repeated problems because we can use those functions over and over and over again however often we want. Think of it kind of like a black box where information goes in and it sits in there and then we get information out. For example, another way to think about it is a drive-through. Imagine you're going over to Taco Bell here by campus and you drive up and they ask to take your order. So you say, hey, I want a taco. And then you drive around and, pay and pick up your taco. So you give them your order, and then you get back what you ordered. So that's very similar to a function. You call the function and sometimes give that function information, and then the function, sometimes it doesn't have to. You could have a function that doesn't kick anything back, but many times a function kicks information back to you. In reality, whoever is calling that function doesn't really care or need to know what goes on inside that function, just like you may not care or want to know what happens from the time you order till the time you get your taco. Same thing with a function name. When you call that function and you call it, passes some stuff, it does something, and then spits back to you your information. And then functions, like I said before, allow us to break down and solve problems. So someone may come to you and say, hey, I need you to do a program and it solve this big problem we have. Well, one of the key attributes of good developers, good programmers, is the capability to take a problem and dissect it into smaller problems. So that's what you need to do, dissect it into smaller problems, and then you build functions that solve the smaller issues, and what you end up with is you've got a solution to this huge problem made up of a bunch of little solutions to little problems. Arguments. I mentioned that we can pass information to a function, and you saw that in the DOM recording with passing the decision when they clicked on button 1 or button 2. But we can pass information to them in order to complete have them complete their task. Doesn't have to. We can have a function that doesn't need an argument, like that first one there, but we can pass an argument, or you might hear the term parameter, passed to a particular function. And so we can pass information to it, and then that function can react differently based upon that information we pass to it. And so you'll see us do that like the decision. Another way we use functions is to reduce duplicate code. One principle to keep in mind is the DRY principle, the dry principle. We want our code to be dry. We do not want it wet. Dry stands for don't repeat yourself. So we want our functions to be reusable. So again, dry, the opposite of wet. We enjoy typing. We want to do things as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Let me play a scenario here for you. Imagine you wanted to go to the Packer game this weekend and you need to buy your seats. Obviously there's different seats to choose from and different prices based on those seats and things. So you could set up a bunch of code saying, okay, if they select seat 132, seat 14, we're going to charge this amount. If they select seat 674, seat 3, then charge this amount. And you would write a ton of code to account for every single section, seat, and all that. It would be much easier if we would create a function, let's say a choose seat function, we pass to it the section and the seat where we've selected, so that we can then do some logic in it where we could say if they've selected section whatever, and if the seat is greater than 1, as in the case of my code, and less than 50, charge a certain price, else charge another price. And then that function's called, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, from an on-click event. So they click it, runs that choose seat function. In this case, we're passing section 132, seat 14, and we don't have to have a ton of duplicate code. Our choose seat function does the work for us. Now, again, like I said before, function allows you to solve problems and sub-problems, divide up labor, eliminate code, all that stuff. One OOP principle we want to strive for when we build functions is, and this coincides with the ability to break down problems, is single purpose principle, or single responsibility principle, SRP. Our function needs to do one thing and one thing only. We don't have one function that does 2 or 3 different things unrelated. Our function does one thing and one thing only. Like before, our choose seat function simply chooses our seats, section and seat number. That's it. That's all it does, and figures out the price. One task, one function. 2 tasks, 2 functions. Now, when we call a function, like from an on-click event, like when they click a link or a button or whatever, and there's several ways to call functions. You can call it when your page loads, you can call it from click, you can call it on hover, you can call it when you fill out a form, field, things like that. There's several ways to call a function, several places from which to call a function. But you need to understand that some functions return a value. Like I said before with going through the drive-through. Not every function does, but some return a value. So you have a function, you pass an argument to, it does its thing, and then it returns some value. The return is a keyword that's used in functions to say, okay, this is the information I want you to send back. Now, it always goes back to where it came from. So if I call a function from an on-click, it'll go back to that field where I called it from. So that's important to keep in mind, that it goes back to where it came from, so that when it gets back to where it came from, you can deal with whatever you need to deal with. So that when you click a function button or whatever, it'll go back to where it came from, and then that function can do with it the information that came back. So it always returns back to where it came from. Keep that in mind. Oh, on a side note, you will also run across some functions that have the return keyword in, but nothing after it. It'll just say return semicolon, no some value variable or anything. Return also immediately stops the function, so sometimes you'll see that keyword used to stop a function from processing. Now, like I've said before, the 3-legged table, HTML, JavaScript, CSS. But we want to, even though those 3 are essential and they work together very well and very closely, we also want to separate them as much as possible, because that makes it easier to maintain our content, our presentation, our functionality. Functions allow us to do that, but one of the things you also need to keep in mind is don't get all caught up in functions. We'll start off with doing some more simple functions before we get really complex, but functions are just fancy variables. That's all they are. So we can store functions within a variable. You will hear me use the term function literal, or you'll come across that term. That's what this means. So function has no function name. So here, before we had like a function choose seat. So the name of our function was choose seat. Here we have a function that doesn't have a name. You see how it says some argument after it? So we have our variable some variable equals function some argument, and then we have our function whatever it does. So that variable of some variable is simply a reference to that function. Think of it like this. Where you live in your house, your physical house, that's where you live. But you have an address. That address references your house. It's not the actual house. You don't live in your address. You live in the physical house. That address simply is a reference so that people know how to get to your house, or how to contact your house, how to send letters, whatever, to your house, how to send bills. Maybe we wish it wouldn't do that, but how to reach you. That's what some variable does in this case. That variable is like your address. It references the actual function that does its thing. And so the way we can call it is we can call it like we did before. You saw here when I called onClick choose seats 132, 114. We do the same thing here, but we use the variable and we can pass an argument through it in parentheses after it to pass whatever argument we need to send to our function. Now, event callbacks. I've briefly referenced these before with the onClick and onload and hover and all that stuff. Those are events. When our end user does stuff in our program, they're events that happen. When the page loads, for example, when they load a page, that's an event. When I click on something, that's an event. When I hover over something, that's an event. And that's called event handling. So what we can do is we can have our page act in such a way that when an event happens, we can have a function, some piece of program happens. So like in the example on the screen, when my page loads, I can have a function run that does whatever it needs to do. Now, this makes it easy to call functions from HTML. We just put in the attribute, whatever we want, on load, on click, on hover, you've seen on mouse over, on mouse out, those types of things. It's easy to do. The problem with doing that goes back to this issue of mixing up our content with our functionality, because now we have a call to our functionality that's mixed in with our HTML. So if we ever need to change that function call, we have to go into our HTML to do it. There is a solution to this problem. The way we solve that dilemma is we do a function reference directly within our JavaScript code. So, for example, I have the onload equals some function. What I can do instead of putting that goes in the body tag, by the way. In the body tag, you have an onload attribute, some function. Instead of putting that in there, I can create in my code, JavaScript code, a call window.onload, because it's a property of the window, or it's an attribute of the window, the onload event. When I do a window.onload, then I can make it equal to that function. So we can pull that code out of that event call out of the body tag and put it in our JavaScript code. Now, there is an issue with this. You can't pass arguments to it. That's why we need function literals like this. So this one would not be able to pass an argument to it. Okay. Just an FYI there. So here's a function literal. So we have window.onload equals some function. That's a function reference. Instead, we can use a function literal where we can say window.onload equals function event. Now, that EVT, you may see the word event, you may see the word EVT. It's not so important what word is in there. It's a lot like a function argument. It can be whatever you want, but I'll explain what that does in just a second. So then inside that function event, you see some function, which is equivalent to the window.onload equals some function. So that EVT, that event, that's the event object. Okay? So what happens is window.onload equals function event. We're passing the DOM event object to the function. So we're passing the onload, the onClick, the on mouse over, on mouse out is captured in that function event. And then we run some function. And we can even, based on that event, we can call different functions based on that event. We can grab that EVT variable and get information about it. Now, one of the other things you need to also understand is that sometimes order is very important in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Loads top to bottom. We don't want to call something for code that doesn't exist yet. So if you ever are writing a function and stuff, and typically what results in this issue is you'll get an undefined error. Here's how this happens. You're placing a call to a function, and that function is trying to affect something that's on your page, like a div tag or an h1 tag or whatever. Well, if that function call is at the top of your page and that div tag it's trying to call is at the bottom of the page, what happens is when the browser is loading that application, that page, it hits that function call. That function call is making a reference to a div tag that it hasn't hit yet, because that's at the bottom of the page. So therefore, it's not defined, and you get an undefined error. There's several ways around this. There's some ways using some frameworks to wait until the page is ready to make some of those calls. You can put JavaScript at the bottom of the page, things like that. So we'll deal with that. Now let's dive into some code here so we can see these things in action. So if you recall this from a previous presentation, we have our theater seats. So if you're just to refresh our memories, we have an application we built for these guys that wanted to be able to purchase theater seats, but they wanted to purchase 3 seats together because they wanted an empty seat between them. They didn't want to sit side by side. So what we did was we had this array of chairs with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 columns and 4 rows, and they were able to find seats. So if we click Find Seats, it says, okay, seats 4 through 6 are available. Do you want to accept? Yes, and it turned them green. You could also say no, cancel, and it would jump through our array. We did that in a previous presentation. But let's review the code itself and see what we're doing. First of all, let's scroll down to the HTML. All the HTML is a div tag, and inside there are image tags with an empty source and empty alt tag, and then there's the Find Seats button that when we click it runs the Find Seats function. There's also in the body tag there's this onload event handler, event call, and we run the init seats function. Now let's look at what our function does. Okay, first thing is we have this variable seats that is simply an array. Let me dissect this a second, because we haven't gotten too deep into arrays. Arrays are like those accordion file folders. I've explained that before, where you can have multiple pieces of information in a single item, a single object. In this case, a variable seats. So here we have from square bracket to square bracket. That's an array, and it has 1, false, true, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces in it. These are all just Boolean values. Notice they coincide with our seats, 9 of them. And if we look, false, our second one's true, third, fourth, fifth is true, and last one's true. Look here. True, 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 true. So we're using an array to say which seats are available and which aren't. So we have one array, which is the first row, another array, second row, third row, fourth row, but notice we have an extra set of brackets on the outside here, that one, because this is a two-dimensional array, meaning we have not just one array, but we have 4 arrays in one. So we need to keep that in mind as we're going through the code. Okay, and I'll explain that as we go through. Then we have a variable called cell seat, and we've instantiated that and initialized it with a -1 value. When we have the end user select a seat, we want to be able to keep track of the seats they've selected and that they've actually selected a seat. This variable is going to allow us to do that. So for example, if we test this variable and say if it's -1, we know they haven't selected a seat yet. So we can use that. Then we have the init seats function. Then we have a set seat function and find seats function. So let me first talk about this init seats function, because that happens first when we load the page. Let's go through that and see what that does. Your init seats function, the first thing it does inside of this function, we have a for loop. Now we haven't gone through loops yet, but all loops are just allow you to do things over and over and over again. So what this does is I have a variable, a temporary variable I set of I set it equal to 0, and I say as long as, this is the condition here, as long as I is less than the lengths of my seats variable. And then this increments it each time. So I want to talk about the seats.length. What that does is we're using the seats variable and we're finding out what the length of that is, seats.length. So if I put up here an alert, because I just want us to see what this does. So I'm going to put seats.length in there. And the answer is 4. The reason it's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, the length of seats is 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 arrays inside of the the first array, the seats. So there's 4 rows, 4 arrays. So this is basically, we could put the number 4 in here and it would do the same thing. The reason why we don't want to, you want to stay away from hard coding as much as possible, because let's say this theater decides to remodel and add another row. You don't have to rebuild your app for that. You just have to put in the array information for that extra row. Okay. So we start off at 0 and we go as long as 0 is less than 4, the length, and every time this loop happens, we add to I. So the first time we run through, I is 0. The next time we run through, because I is equal to 0, 0 is less than 4, we then make I equal to 1 after the end of this loop. So it goes through the next time, I is going to be equal to 1. The second time we go through, 1 is less than 4, and so on and so forth. So that's the outer. This is a nested loop. Notice the 2 for statements here. So this is a loop, and this is a loop. So inside there we have another for loop. Now this time we have a temporary variable we're using j. And the only reason we're using j is because we've already used I. You could use whatever letter you want. You see I, j, and x and y used a lot. But we're using j here to distinguish this one from the I. Same thing, j equals 0. J is less than seats length, but this one's a little different. Seats I length. Notice, remember we're using numbers. Arrays, we can keep track of where they're at with their keys. Arrays have keys, so, and there's 0 base. So if I go up to my first one, let's say this first array here, like this first slot of the array, this is 0, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Starts off at 0 based. So if I were to do this with the first one, if I were to, let's say this were a single array, I can go, see, oops, typo there, seats. That's telling me the first position, the first slot of my seats array. Second, third, fourth, because they're 0 based. Okay, so when I run this, seats 0.length, seats, the actual seats array has, remember we had 4 positions, so this is position 0, this is position 1, this is position 2, this is position 3. So seats 0.length, remember seats.length was 4. Seats 0.length, I'm saying go into the first position, seat 0, tell me what the length of that is. So if I refresh my screen here, it says 9. And that's what I'd expect because there are 9 true false options here. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're going to be using the values of these variables to keep track of where we're at in our arrays. So when we're looping through this entire array, so the first time this loop throughs, we're going through this row. I is equal to 0. So when we get to line 15, this I right here is equal to 0. So we're saying j equal to 0, and j being 0, 0 less than seats 0.length, which is 9, j plus plus. So the first time this goes through, we have if seats 0, 0. It's a 2-dimensional array. So seats 0, let me show you this. Seats 0, the first 0 is the row, and then the second 0 is the first position. So the first row, first position. Seat 01, seat 02, seat 03, so on and so forth. So seat 03 would be 0, 1, 2, 3. So if I save this and refresh it, I'm expecting it'll alert the word true back to me. Yep, and it's true. So the first time this goes, seat 0, 0, okay, if that returns true, in this case it's false, but if it returns true, do this stuff, else do this stuff. So the first time this runs, I is going to be 0, J is going to be 0. It's going to return false. That's the 0, 0 position. So if false, so if this is true, do this, but it's not. So it's going to, first thing it's going to do is this, down here. The second time it's going to run, it's going to come back up to the top of this and say J is going to be, I will still be 0, J is going to be I will stay 0 until we get all the way through this row. And then J is going to be 1, and it'll go through this, and so the second time it'll be seat 0, 1. So we're going through this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, all the way through, and then we loop down in the next row. When it pops out to the outer loop and I changes to 1, then we do 0 through 9 again, I changes to 2, 0 through 9, 3, 0 through 9. Okay? And based on whether it's true or false, it'll do line 18 or line 22. Now, what these two lines do on line 18 and line 22 is they run a set seat function right here. So they call the set seat function and pass information to it and its parameters. And again, we're using the I and J to help us with this. So before we go too much further, let me just back up one step and let me just do this. I'm going to remove my alert inside here. I'm going to use I and J, just because I want to make sure you're clear on this, how this runs. So false, true, false, true, 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 false, true. See, it's looping through that array and doing what we need it to do. I got to go through all 36 of them. There we go. Okay. Let me comment that out. Now let me explain what these do here. Again, I and J, I'm hoping that's clear as far as that it's cycling through the numbers of the array. So if it returns true, it's going to set seat 0. Let's imagine this is the first time we went through. Set seat 0 times seats I dot length plus J. You may think, what in the world is he doing to me? Let's take a look at what that does. Okay. So let me just take this and I'm going to copy it and put it in my alert here. Okay, seats I is going to be 0 the first time. You multiply that by seats I dot length. Now anything you multiply times 0 is going to be 0. And then we're adding J to it, which is 0. So we're saying, so this, the first time it runs should be 0. The next time it runs, since J is going to be 1, I is still 0, so this side of the equation, the first row is going to return 0 every time. Then it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What we're doing here is we want to accommodate our end user. Like, let me show you what I mean here. I think I forgot to save it. Let me go back and save it here real quick. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 13, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So see, we're numbering the seats. And the only reason we're doing that is we're finding our seat, we're adding basically the number in the row to it so that we can say seat 1, seat 2, seat 3, all the way through the last seat number. Because it would make no sense to an end user to say seat 0 is available. Well, what is seat 0 to, you know, a non-programmer? That makes no sense. So we're trying to just figure out what seat it is we're passing to them, okay? And then we're passing through the word of the text avail and available seat. And we're doing the same thing on the other one, calling the same function but passing through two different texts. Now, let me explain let's look at what set seat does. Get rid of that. So we're passing through it the seat number, that's what we were doing before to figuring out what it is, the status, and a description. Inside of there, we're saying go into our document and grab the element with the ID of seat plus our seat number that we're passing to it. If we go down to our HTML, you see we have IDs of seat 0 all the way through seat 35. Okay. So we want to grab those seats. So we're saying grab those IDs, and in the first one, make the source equal to seat underscore status.ping. What that does is we have the status of avail or unavail. We have images seat underscore avail.ping, seat underscore unavail.ping. What those do is those just simply set the gray or the red chairs. That's all they do. Then the next one, go into my document, get an element with the ID, that seat number, change the alt, the empty alt. So we're setting, first we set the source, now we're setting the alt to be seat available or unavailable. Scroll back up here. Okay, seat unavailable seat or available seat. What that does is, oh, I forgot to save it again. I do that all the time. What that does is allows me when my mouse hovers over on some browsers it says avail or unavail seat. It also is for screen readers, so on whether it's available or not. Okay. Okay, so we've gone through the initialized seats, which sets up our based on the array, goes through and loops through the array and sets up what seats are what. And we also set up the colors of the seats and put all our images in there. The other thing we need to do is we need to look at what happens when I click on the button for Find Seats. So that's our Find Seat function here. So the first thing we need to do is we need to check to see if that select seat variable, that's that variable that was way up here, is -1. We need to check to see if that is greater than 0 or not. If it's greater than 0, they've selected a seat already, and they're just trying to find another seat. They're starting to program over. We don't want to screw things up with that select seat button and have them have two different kinds of seats, two sets of green seats. So we need to reset that cell seat back to -1 to start off with, and we need to reinitialize to change the colors of our seats. So we're making a call to that same init seats function. So see, there's a prime example where I'm saving some code space, because otherwise that functionality that the init seats function does, I would have to rewrite all over again. I don't want to do that. So then, after we make sure everything's reset, we then search through to find out if there is availability. And we're using a while loop here. So the first thing we do is say, okay, we have a variable of I equals 0, and we're using a variable finished equals false to see if they're done or not with selecting their seats. I'll explain that as we go through. So our while loop says while I is less than seats length, so very similar to a for loop, in this case less than 4. So while I is less than 4, and the double ampersand is and not finished. The reason why we have a not there is, remember, a not is a negative, so it returns it. Remember maybe back to your math classes where you multiplied two negatives together and it became a positive? Well, here we have a false, the value, Boolean value false being stored in our finished variable. So the value of finished is false. By putting a negative in front of it, we make it true. A negative to a negative makes a positive. So we're saying as long as I is less than seats length, 0 less than 4, and finished, and that's true, then we want this loop to run. At some point, we're going to change the word finished from false to true. Therefore, if the value of finished is true and we negate it with the exclamation point, the value changes to false. Then inside here, we're doing a for loop, just like we did before, and we're looping through our rows. Notice seats and I in the bracket. So j is 0, j is less than seats I length, which is going to be 9, and then we increment j++. First, we got to see, remember our customers wanted 3 seats together. They didn't want 2 seats together. They wanted 3 empty seats. So the first thing we got to see is if the current seat, as we're going through and looping through our array, is the current seat that we're choosing, are there 2 seats next to them that are available? We got to see that. So here's how we do it. We have if seats I and j, so we start off 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2. If that's available, it's going to return true. And here we have ij plus 1, ij plus 2. So the first time this runs, seats 0, 0, seats 0, 1, seats 0, 2. So we're checking this one, and this one. In an if statement, in order for an if statement to return true when you have multiple arguments like this, every one has to be true. If any of these 3 in an and that's with an and, not an or, if any of these 3 return false, the whole thing's false. So we've got, the first time it runs, we've got false, true, false, the whole thing's going to be false. So therefore, this stuff in here is not going to run, but my else statement's going to run. And what my else statement is going to do is it's going to say the user rejected the seat, so clear the seat selection, keep looking. So we set the cell seat to -1, and then we call that set seat again that I showed you before to make sure, see whether it's available or not. Okay. Then, if it is true, if all 3 of those do return back, so these 3, the first time it runs, false. Second time it runs, false. Third time it runs, false. Fourth time it runs, aha, we got 3 together, it's going to return true, because in our if statement, all 3 of these are going to be true. Then we can set the seat selection and update the appearance of the seats here. So we set the seat selected to I times the length of the seat in j. So let's say it's, let me do it this way. I'm going to alert cell seat here, so we can see how this works. Okay, seats 4 through 6 in row 1 are available. Do you accept? Okay, yes I do. So, but if you saw what that popped up before, seat 3. So what it did was that cell seat took whatever the value of I was, multiplied it by seats, whatever value I was, times length. So in this case it would have been 9 plus j to tell you what seat was selected. Okay, that's what that does. So we're setting the value of select seat, so we know they've selected a seat. Then we call that set seat function again and pass our seats to it just like we did before, and all 3 seats, but this time we're passing just different parameters, select and your seat, because that allows it to change to green right here, because we have a ping file that is seat_select, which is a green seat. Now, what here though is where some of the magic happens here with this confirm. You guys have been working with prompts. A confirm is like a prompt, but it doesn't allow them to fill it in. It basically is a true, false, okay, or cancel. So when I refresh my screen here and click find seats, here's a confirm dialog box that if I click OK, it's going to return true, cancel, it's going to return false. So here, this variable accept is where we have a confirm, and inside a confirm, just like in a prompt, I'm telling it some text, but I'm just using some variables to determine what seat they're at. So seats, whatever the value of j is plus 1, that way they don't get a seat 0. So seats 1 through whatever are available. So here in our array, this first green seat is actually 0, 1, seat 3 in the array. But again, from a human being standpoint, it's seat 4. That's why we're doing the plus 1 here. So seats 4 through 6 in row, whatever I row we're in, are available. Do you want to accept or not? And that's when we click and we get whether it's true or false. So let me just refresh here, save this. Seats 4 through 6 in row 1 are available. Do you accept? Yes, I do. And it goes green. So if accept, the user accepted the seats, so we're done, we break out of the loop. What we do, up here is where we actually set the green there. If they've accepted, we set finish to true, because what that does is that stops our while loop from running, because when we negate true, it's going to be false. And we use this break statement, which breaks out of this for loop. Because once they've accepted a seat, we don't want to keep going through that double array, two-dimensional array, and have them select more seats. They're done. Now, if they cancel, so accept returns false from that confirm, then we reset the seats as to being available, just like we did before. And then this increments the outer loop counter I++. That's for this while loop, because if they keep going and never accept a seat, finished will never return true, because if they keep clicking cancel. But we also don't want them to get to the end of the array and it keeps going, ask when the array's done. There's no more seats to select. So when I click find seats, 4 through 6 are available. Do you want it? No. Seats 7 through 9, that's these right here. In row 2 are available. No. Oh wait, I meant to click no. Hold on. Cancel. Cancel. Seats 1 through 3 in row 3 are available. No. 2 through 4, no. 3 through 5, no. 4 through 6, no. Seats 1 through 3 in row 4, yes. Now, for some of you, that may be some heavy code. What I encourage you to do is go through it, play with it, make sure you understand it. Try to break it, put in some alerts so you understand what's happening with some of these loops and stuff. I know we haven't covered loops, but trying to understand that logic will help you. You know, put an alert in that inside your for loop that shows you the value of j, and you can picture it going through. Now, let's look at some enhancements with functions that we can make this a little better. Version 7, let me go to that one. Okay, version 7, find seats, 4 through 6, accept, yes. So it works the same there, but let's look at what we did a little differently. We have this get seat status function and show seat status function. The other functions are the same, except we added that show seat status here to the on click event. Here's what we did. When I click, it says that seat's available, that seat's not available, this seat is yours. So whatever available seats are. So let's see how this works. So the function gets called whenever they click on the seat, and we're passing to it the number of the seat, so we know what they've clicked on. So let's look at these here. Okay, so when we click on show seat status, it's going to run this show seat status function right here on line 37. We're passing a seat number to it. All this does is an alert and says this seat is, and remember it said yours, available, or unavailable. But notice this is new to you. We're actually making a function call within our alert. So we're saying run the get status function and pass that same seat number to it. So we're running this function here and passing our seat num to it. And then we're saying if the select seat is not equal to -1, okay, so they've selected a seat already. That's what that's saying. Remember, we use that variable to keep track of where our seats are and who's selected, if they've selected one. So if select seat is not equal to -1 and the seat num that we pass is equal to select seat, or it's equal to the select seat plus 1, because we got 3 in a row, remember, or it's equal to the select seat plus 2. So any one of those 3 they click on, it's going to return yours. Now remember what I said in the presentation, that return function, or return keyword, immediately stops the function, and when you call a function, it returns back to where it came from. So this value of yours returns back to where it was called from, which is down here on line 38. So it's going to replace the function called getSeatStatusSeatNum with the word yours, so it's going to say this seat is yours. So if I run it and I click on any one of these, this seat is yours. This seat is yours. Now, it does the same thing with, let me skip over available. If it doesn't find it in yours, that logic we just went through, it then looks to see if it's available, and I'm going to go through this logic in detail in just a second. If it doesn't meet any of those, it's going to say unavailable. There, unavailable. Now, I want to talk about this, how it figures out that a seat is available, because this may be somewhat confusing here. We're going to be using math to figure out what seats are available and what seats aren't available, and to see if they're clicking on a red seat or a gray seat. Okay, what I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to take this out of here, and I'm going to put it up here underneath and I'm going to put it within an alert so we can see what it's going to return. Actually, do it this way. Okay, I'm going to put pieces of this in this alert so we can see how this is going to work. So we're basically going to call this variable here. Okay, I'm going to dissect this a little for you as we go through. Okay, the first thing we're doing is we're saying whatever seat num gets passed to it right here, we're passing that through to here. Okay, so for the sake of argument, I'm going to say var seat num is equal to what's it for? Okay, I'm hard coding a number in there because otherwise I'd run into an error because I'm not passing anything to it. Seat num wouldn't exist. So then we're dividing that by seats 0.length. So the length, dividing it by 9 basically. So if I take this right here and alert that out, let's see what we get. That's it. Okay, I'm actually going to move this. Forgot about an issue on that. So I'm going to move this down to and put it inside of here. Okay. So I want to alert. Let me, just so we know what alerts what. Math calc. We can follow it. So when I click on this, my math count is 0.11111. And the reason it's 0.11111 is it took the value of the seat num that we passed to it. In this case, it was seat 1, and divided it by the length, which is 9. So if we do 1 divided by 9, 0.11111. Okay? So we do that calculation, and that lets us know where in the row we are. We'll get a different calculation based on the seat num. Okay? So it lets us know where in the row we are. Now, so that's this calculation here. Now we have this math.floor. That math is a built-in object to JavaScript, and it has a method called floor on it. So math.floor, let me just type it in here. Now, we all learned the rules to rounding when we were young, and we learned that if it was less than 5, we round down. If it was 5 and over, we round up. In this case, what this is doing is we are telling it we want to round down, even if it's 5 and over. So, when I make sure I saved it, I refresh it, 0, click on the middle and 0, 0, 0. See, they're all rounding down. So everything in this row will be 0, this row will be 3, 2, and 1. So we're just rounding down. The reason why we're doing that is, remember, arrays are 0 based. If we didn't do that, it may return not a 0, 1, 2, 3, but maybe a 4, and that would not work with our array. We get an error. Okay. Then after that, we've got this one. Let me pop this one into my math calc alert there. So whatever seat number we're passing to it, we're doing modulo, which says divide this, but give me just the remainder. And then we'll multiply or the remainder of seat 0 length. So let me show you how this works. So 1, 5, 7, 4. Okay. Notice how when I click on, for example, this one, it's giving me the array 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This should be 4. Okay. What we're doing is we're taking our seat num. If we divide that by our seat's length and give the remainder, it'll tell us what seat they're in. So we're pulling back what seat they're in. So the first one was finding the row. The second piece was finding the seat they're in. So if I pull the whole one over here. So math floor, get rid of this here just a second. So the first one, the row. The second one is the seat in the row. So now, if I refresh, if I click this one, it should say 0, 1. 0 and 1. This one here should say 2 and 7. And finally 3 and 4. So we're using math to figure out where we're at in our array sequentially. And then we're passing that information to this seats array. We're saying if seats 0, notice it's using the brackets, 0, 1, 0, 2. What we're doing is we're simply using math to grab these pieces of information to return to our if statement to return true or false. That's what we're doing. Because we want to know if the seat is available or not. So if it returns true, we're going to return variable back to where it came from in this show seat status function. Okay. Now let's go to our last version, 8 here. Okay, let me run it. Seats 4 through available, no. So I'll take that one. Red screen, yours, available, unavailable. Okay, find them again. Yeah, I'll take that one. Okay, so here's what we did here. I cleaned up my HTML code. Look at, for example, look at this HTML where we have show seat status right there. It's not in here anymore. And our init seats in our body, not there anymore. And look at all this code that was in there. It's not there anymore. This is an example of what I was talking about in the presentation about separating and modularizing your code and making your code separate from content and styling. We have this theaterseats.js. Let me open that file here. take a look at that. What we did was we took our JavaScript code and moved it externally, stored it in a file called theaterseats.js, and then we're just making a call to that code here from our HTML with a script tag. That's all we're doing. So our HTML is kept pretty clean. We don't have to deal with the code in here. All our code's in here. Now, a lot of this code looks very similar. You have the seats variable with the array and the cell seat, and you have the init seats function, get seat status that we just covered, the show seat status, the set seat, the find seats. But this stuff down here is new. Okay? So, because we needed a way, now that we're working with a external JavaScript file, a way to do things like we did in here, in this one, like we needed a way to, how do we call init seats when the body loads? How do we set the on-click event to show seat status? And how do we set the on-click event to find seats for the button? So here's how we did it. We did it with this, this function literal here. We have window.onload equals function. And so when our window loads, run this function, and then here's the stuff that our function does. First thing we do is we say, go into our document, grab an element with the ID of find seats. That's our button down at the bottom. And then the on-click event of that button, make it equal to find seats in the on-click. So what we're doing is we're setting this function in the on-click event down here. Notice you do not need the parentheses when you're doing that. Okay. Now we also need the on-click for the images. So we're saying here, go into our document, notice there's a lot of repetition here. There is a way to do this a little better, but we're not ready for that yet. So go into our document, get our element with the ID of seat 0 in this case, and in the on-click, oops, I have a mistake there. In the on-click, we're doing a function literal where we're passing our click event to it and show status, calling that function to it. Okay, so we're creating the on-click event on the fly. Then here we're running the init seats function after the window on load. So if you do this in phases, you might say, okay, I want window on load, then I can move my init seats function to it, which was here in the body on load, but we need a way to move this out of here, out of all these, and then we need a way to move this on-click out of here. So this is how we did it. Signed it an on-click event here, and signed all these on-click events here to the function. Okay. So it's a way to, we didn't change the functionality, we just made it easier to maintain, made it more elegant, separated our structure from our content and our functionality a little bit better, so if they want to make a change, we can do it easier. Okay. I hope this has been beneficial for you. Take some time, chew on this a little bit, run through this, try to play with it, try to break it, so that you can learn how this works and understand it, and happy coding.